Ever find yourself kind of wrestling with these huge ideas, these concepts that are so vast our minds struggle to wrap around them?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I mean, concepts like infinity, it's kind of a mind bender, right? And speaking of, you sent over some fascinating stuff on this very topic about infinity. So we're diving into that today.
Yeah, it's a subject that always sparks this deep curiosity, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And the way Mario Sabán invites us to explore it in his doctoral thesis is particularly thought-provoking. He doesn't limit himself to just one way of understanding it, you know what I mean?
Exactly. So for this deep dive, we're going to be exploring Saban's thesis titled Infinity and Language in Jewish Kabbalah, a mathematical, linguistic, and philosophical approach. Even the title itself gives us a glimpse into the ambition and richness of this exploration, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's a work that interweaves applied mathematics, linguistics, philosophy, and Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, in a really captivating way.
Right, a real interesting mix.
By analyzing the concept of infinity from these multiple perspectives, the thesis offers us a much more complete and nuanced understanding.
And for you, our listeners, who like us appreciate those aha moments and prefer not to feel overwhelmed by too much information, we assure you that we'll be focusing on the most revealing aspects of Saban's work. So our mission today is to unravel his exploration of infinity, particularly the Kabbalistic concept of Ein Sof, the infinite absolute. And get this, we're going to try to understand its unique perspective compared to, mathematical and philosophical ideas. So to kick things off, let's talk about the foundation, that interdisciplinary approach we were just talking about. What's so fascinating about combining these four areas to understand infinity?
Well, what's fascinating here is how Saban manages to combine these four disciplines in a way that reveals surprising aspects of infinity. It's not just about putting them side by side, but showing how each one illuminates the concept from a different angle. It kind of gives us a richer and deeper view of something that would otherwise be ungraspable, you know?
Yeah, I get you. It's like using different lenses to see the same object. Right, you get a more complete picture.
Exactly.
And at that intersection, where all these paths cross, we come across something very interesting that Saban discusses in Chapter 2, the coincidentia oppositorum, the coincidence of opposites. Now, for someone like me who tends to see things in black and white, this sounds intriguing. Could you break down what that means a little more?
Of course, the central idea is that concepts that at first glance seem completely contradictory, such as the finite and the infinite, can coexist and even complement each other.
Okay, now that is really interesting. So it's not like one excludes the other.
Right. And this principle isn't exclusive to Kabbalah. It also has relevance in mathematical logic. It's as if reality, at its deepest levels, refuses to be pigeonholed into our strictest and most limited categories.
Okay, hold on. I need to process this. So it's like saying you can have something that's finite, but also infinite at the same time.
In a way, yes. It's a way of understanding how seemingly opposite concepts can actually be interconnected in profound ways.
This is where it gets really interesting because we're going to focus on our main topic, the absolute infinite and the Ein Sof in Kabbalah. And for this, Chapter X of the thesis, the revelation of the infinite, the Ein Sof of Jewish mysticism is key, right? What does this chapter reveal about the Kabbalistic view of infinity?
Absolutely. In this chapter, Saban delves into Ein Sof, which in Kabbalah represents the purest essence of the divine, the infinite absolute. It exists even before any manifestation of the universe as we know it. It's crucial to understand that this concept goes far beyond a simple idea of quantitative infinity.
You mean like the kind of infinity we deal with in math?
Yeah, like what we find, for example, in Cantor's transfinite numbers, which talk about different sizes of infinity.
So if I'm getting this right, the main difference lies in the fact that while mathematics can describe an actual infinity, as if we could count to infinity even though we never reach it, Ein Sof is something of a completely different nature.
Precisely. Saban argues that Ein Sof is an absolute infinity that transcends any formal structure and any attempt at human definition. You can't apply the same conceptual tools that we use to understand mathematical infinity to it. I think the key here is that Saban invites us to move beyond purely logical frameworks, to begin to intuit the nature of ultimate reality.
Okay, so it's not just about quantity, it's about something more fundamental.
Yes, exactly. It's about a kind of infinity that is beyond our ability to fully grasp or define.
And this is where that peculiar idea of Kabbalah, the Tzimtzum, the divine contraction, comes into play. Now, when I first heard this, it kind of blew my mind. How does this concept of contraction relate to the idea of an absolute infinite like Ein Sof?
The Tzimtzum is a very powerful concept. It is described as an act of God withdrawing from himself, creating a void space within the infinite vastness of Ein Sof. This void is what allows for the creation of the finite universe. Think of it this way. The infinite, paradoxically, had to make space for the finite, creating existence through a form of self-imposed limitation. An absolutely mind-blowing idea.
Yeah.
Wow, that's heavy. So it's like the infinite had to limit itself to create the finite.
Precisely.
That's a real paradox.
Saban makes a fascinating comparison here with certain mathematical paradoxes, where a part can be equal to the whole, something he mentions on page 92 of his thesis.
Really? It's like those mind-bending optical illusions where a small shape contains the same image repeated infinitely.
It's a similar concept, yes.
Yeah.
It challenges our usual way of thinking about parts and wholes.
Fascinating. And how does the mathematical perspective fit into all of this? You mentioned Cantor earlier, and his work on infinity was revolutionary. How does his vision connect with that of Ein Sof?
Connecting this with the broader view, we see that Cantor, the mathematician who revolutionized our understanding of infinity by demonstrating that there are different sizes of infinity with his transfinite numbers, also made a distinction between the actual infinity and an absolute infinity. The latter, for Cantor, was intimately linked to the divine, transcending human capacity for understanding. Saban explores this connection between Ein Sof and Cantor's theological views in Chapter 5. It's as if mathematics, at its most extreme limits, begins to knock on the doors of metaphysics, recognizing the existence of an infinity that goes beyond its own tools.
So are we saying that math and mysticism are kind of converging here?
In a way, yes. They're both grappling with the concept of infinity, and both seem to point toward something that transcends our usual ways of knowing.
It's fascinating how different disciplines, using such distinct languages and methods, end up meeting at the frontier of the incomprehensible.
Exactly. And Kabbalah delves even deeper into this idea through the symbolism of the tree of life and the dynamics of the Sephirot.
Okay, I gotta admit, those Sephiros always kind of confuse me.
I know, it's a lot to take in. There are these divine emanations that act as bridges, as intermediaries between the infinite and incomprehensible Ein Sof and the finite world in which we exist. Think of them like different facets through which the infinite somehow reveals itself to the finite.
Right, like stepping stones connecting the unknowable to the knowable.
Precisely.
Saban also establishes a dialogue with philosophy, right? You mentioned Spinoza. How does the Spinozian idea of an infinite substance compare with the Kabbalistic concept of Ein Sof?
Yes, in Chapter 13, Saban explores the connection with Spinoza's idea of an infinite substance that constitutes all of reality.
Spinoza, the guy who said that God is everything and everything is God.
Exactly. But Saban points out a crucial divergence. While Spinoza identifies God with this infinite substance, Kabbalah emphasizes the radical transcendence of Ein Sof, which is beyond anything we can conceive or directly identify with the world. It's a subtle but important distinction.
So it's like saying that for Spinoza, God is immanent, present within the world, while for Kabbalah, God is transcendent, beyond the world.
Exactly. It's a different way of understanding the relationship between the divine and the created world.
To help us ground these abstract ideas, Saban also draws on examples from literature. Tell us about Borges. How does Saban use the work of Borges to illustrate the idea of infinity?
Well, Borges is an excellent example. In his Book of Sand, which Saban mentions on page 91, we find the image of a book with infinite pages, an object that challenges our capacity for understanding and symbolizes an infinity ungraspable to our finite minds.
Like trying to count the grains of sand on a beach.
It's that sense of overwhelming vastness, yes. And this image resonates with the mystery of the letter Aleph in Kabbalah, which Saban analyzes on page 246 as a symbol of origin and totality, something that contains everything but cannot be contained itself. Borges' infinite book becomes a powerful metaphor for the inherent limitations of our finite minds when confronted with true infinity, a central idea that Saban explores.
So if we were to distill Saban's central argument, what would you say is the main conclusion of his thesis on infinity and language?
The core of his argument is that language, both in its formal mathematical form and in its natural expression, has inherent limitations when we try to understand ultimate reality, the absolute. Kabbalah, through its rich symbolism and analogies, offers a complementary path to transcend those limitations, allowing us to intuit what escapes pure reason. It's as if language were a useful map, but the real territory of infinity demanded another kind of exploration, a more intuitive and symbolic one.
You know, it's like trying to describe the taste of chocolate to someone who's never tasted it. Words can only go so far.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that there are experiences and realities that lie beyond the reach of language.
And that intuition of Ein Sof is not something static, a definition we can learn by heart, but rather a mystical experience, a dynamic revelation. Is it a form of knowledge that goes beyond the purely intellectual?
Precisely. Saban suggests that absolute infinity, in its deepest nature, can only be experienced, felt, beyond the capacity of our rational instruments. And this, I think, connects directly with your interest in gaining a deeper understanding of these topics. For you, who are always exploring these fundamental questions, this idea that there are forms of knowledge beyond pure logic could be very resonant.
It definitely is. It kind of opens up a whole new way of approaching these big questions.
It does, doesn't it? It challenges us to think about knowledge and understanding in new ways.
So, to sum it all up, Saban's great contribution is to show us how Jewish Kabbalah not only complements our mathematical and philosophical conceptions of infinity, but also challenges and expands them, offering us a more holistic view that integrates reason with transcendence. It's as if he's telling us that to understand infinity, we need all the tools at our disposal: logic, reason, language, but also intuition and symbol.
Exactly. His work invites us to consider that different traditions of knowledge can provide unique and valuable perspectives on fundamental questions of existence. It encourages us to have intellectual humility and openness to different ways of understanding the world.
You know, it's a reminder that sometimes we need to go beyond our usual ways of thinking to really grasp the vastness of the universe and our place within it.
A humbling thought indeed.
To close this deep dive, let's briefly recap. We've explored how Saban's thesis addresses infinity from an interdisciplinary perspective, the crucial distinction between the mathematical and Kabbalistic views of this concept, and how Ein Sof is presented as a unique perspective on absolute infinity. Now, I leave you with one last thought. Considering the limitations of language in describing infinity, as explored by Saban, how might this influence our understanding of other profound and abstract concepts in life? Could there be other ways of knowing that go beyond words and logic?
A very pertinent question. It invites us to reflect on intellectual humility and openness to different forms of knowledge.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the complexities of infinity.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking those aha moments.
And remember, the infinite is out there, waiting to be discovered.
And maybe, just maybe, it's also within us.
Perhaps that's the greatest mystery of all.
Food for thought.
Definitely.
Thanks again.
You're welcome.